everyone, this is update for September 21, 2022, date 210 of the war, end of the date update. As I mentioned in the previous video, the main sort of event, the main news was announcement by Russian president that he starts mobilization in the country. And let's just recap it at high level. So the key points that he made: okay, we started mobilization. He did not disclose how many soldiers, which, as I mentioned before, is irrelevant because it will be as many as needed. So Russian Minister of Defense clarified. He said that it's going to be 300,000. So understanding is that initial draw will be 300,000, and then if there is need for more, there will be more. And then let's actually look at this layers. I actually found the layers in Russian media. So they show, as I said, there are like several layers, and the first layer is this one, as I showed. This is the first column. Then there is a second layer, and then the third layer. And obviously the logic is this: the more desperate you are, the fewer resources you have, you go to the higher level. So initially, it's, as you can see, mostly young male up to 35. This is for soldiers. This is junior officers up to 50. Then majors, colonels to 55. Above colonels, it's all lieutenant colonels up to 55, colonels up to 60, and then above colonels, I guess it's generals, 65. So this is sort of initial draw, and the focus is going to be on those first who's going to be drawn, or as those who served, who signed the contracts in the past and served in Russian forces, including Syria, Libya, elsewhere. Those are going to be the most sought after, let's put this way. Then the next layer is even within this first layer, this kind of like sub layers, we can kind of say. The first are those who have real battlefield experience, no matter where. Those are going to be the most sought after because they don't require much training, as you can imagine, and the training is going to be poor regardless. So they, in a way, more lucky in terms of that they're more prepared. Then within this first layer, they're going to be conscripts, right, who served the 1 or 2 years in the Russian army. That's pretty much every male is required to serve. So that this is this first layer, and then second layer, as you can see, the age goes up to 45-year-old, 55. You see the trend. The idea is that. And then the last layer, it's the soldiers could be up to 50. And then there is a plan to draw female as well. This is for female. So with non-officer female up to 45, officer female up to 50. To be fair, something similar was actually in the works in Ukraine up until recently. There was a plan starting from October 1st to basically conscript women into the Ukrainian army. Right now it's more volunteers. You're not required to serve, even though there's still about, I think, 2 to 3% of women are serving in the Ukrainian army out of the sort of entire population of Ukrainian army, which I would say relatively high, given that this is like free will. This is not conscription. But anyways, going back to Ukraine, so there was a plan to basically force women to serve in Ukrainian army. However, it was scrapped due to sort of public outcry. Then now this plan probably will be back on the table in Ukraine, given this whole situation. So this is a high level what's going on with mobilization in Russia. And then a few more things is that the prison term for not showing up to this conscription point is 2 to 3 years. And then even further, what this means is that This mobilization limits movement of essentially all males in Russia, not only internationally but also domestically. And the reason is that there is a limitation on movement domestically because the conscription system is really like totally outdated. Like let's say 100, like what was going on in World War One, essentially, where the only way to figure out where you are is by knowing your address. So it doesn't track the movement of people as good. So for that reason, they limit movement of people in the first place. So then there is no difficulty finding them, basically. So that's a situation with this conscription or mobilization, and then as a result of that, this morning there were all tickets to nearby states where there is no visa requirements were sold out for next several days. So that really means I think Azerbaijan, Armenia, probably some other countries in Central Asia, and I don't know, Turkey as well, probably. So that's so some portion of Russian male population is voting with their feet, and despite the fact that technically they cannot, per this law, they cannot leave the country, it does look that this is not being enforced yet, because there were sort of statement from one of the airports saying that they don't enforce this rule yet. It will probably happen sooner than later. Some other portion of the Russian population is protesting on the street. There is definitely protest in Moscow. It's very clear. It's let's put this way. This is always a subjective opinion. I don't think this protest will go anywhere. The Russian society is not fed up with the war enough, in my subjective opinion. So I think, and then probably partially the reason why the sort of gates are still open to leave Russia is because Russian leadership also understands that those who have money, they could be potential leaders of the revolution. So why not to let them flee the country and be out of the country? So then revolution without leadership is not going to happen. It's just going to be, I don't know what the English word for that, but it's not going to be revolution, but just disorganized chaos that leads to nowhere. Someone can kind of help me to find the right word. I'm pretty sure that's pretty common word. I guess I'm just a little bit still sick and missing some words. So that's a situation. So again, this is very clever strategy by Russian top, where they want all potential leaders to leave the country, and that's why I think they still don't enforce those laws. Then what sort of another point about, and that sort of rattle Russian society, is that political top essentially exempt themselves from being called into army, and that's obviously very how to say depressing, I guess. That's probably proper way to say. You don't motivate people to go and die if you decided to basically hide behind their backs. And then actually related to this is there was exchange of prisoners of war from both sides. Actually, not only prisoners of war, but also agents and caught agents. So Russia got what they wanted, and the main person there was Viktor Medvedchuk, who was a Russian agent that was tried unsuccessfully to play a role in Ukrainian politics, but it was a totally money black hole for the Russian KGB, FSB. Nevertheless, that was important agent for them, so they decided to exchange him for Azov leadership and some other Azov members. So and they are interned in Turkey till the leadership, Azov leadership, till the end of the war in Turkey. So this also made it extremely this move is extremely unpopular in those sort of motivated, hardcore Russians who fight on the front line, because from their perspective, it's betraying them, because they were sort of one of the prime targets, and they felt like this is like at least some success that they can that they can be happy about, and yet they all released, and the person who Russia got, Viktor Medvedchuk, is extremely unpopular among like sort of lower level Russians, those what I call motivated Russians that are fighting on the battlefield. His close friend and Mosin friend, really close friend, extremely close friend with Russian President Vladimir Putin, basically. So again, you can see that everybody feels that this is the treatment is not the same to different level. Like everybody's treated not the same way, but in different ways, and that's really demotivating factor again for those Russians who want to continue fight. And because initially there was quite a bit of upbeat mood as a result of this announcement among those sort of hardcore Russians. Now they feel a little bit betrayed. So again, the psychological effect of this announcement essentially went to nowhere in this situation. So now I want to mention one more thing is about referendums. So basically what Russia, not even referendums, Russia decided that what Russian president said, that Russia is going to annex captured territories, whatever they are, doesn't matter. The way they do it, legalize it, at least in their eyes, is they're gonna do referendums, right? What I said before, and the key feature that I actually didn't mention is that all of those refugees that fled these regions and that fled to Ukraine are not allowed to participate. So it's not even sort of representative from any angle, from whatever you look at this, is totally not representative. So sorry. So this is kind of recap summary what's going on. Now let's actually sort of look into the future of what's sort of the consequences of this action and what might be the intent of the Russian side. And the consequences are the following: is that if Russia throws on the battlefield 300,000 soldiers, they probably will win the war. Let's put it this way, unless Ukraine gets a lot of Western heavy equipment, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. Because the only way to offset Ukrainian inefficiency and incompetence, and this is more related to the middle and senior levels in Ukrainian command, and actually more so actually in sort of economic side of the country. That's really where the incompetence is it's just unimaginable. Let's put it this way. Because army is also a reflection of the society to a great extent. And so right now it's very clear that the situation is tilting in the Russian favor, because there was a lot of euphoria in Ukraine after success in this Kupiansk / Balaklia offensive, and which is obviously sort of well-grounded in terms of yes, those were clear successes, but it doesn't mean it was just won battle, but the war is not linear in terms of like, okay, you won the battle and Russia will just keep the status quo and it won't try to change the whole sort of landscape. And this 300,000 soldiers, and this is not just 300,000 soldiers. If needed, there will be another 300, another 100, whatever is needed, basically. If needed, another 500, another million. So this is just the sort of the first echelon of their reserves, essentially. So Ukrainian leadership, and by that I mean all of the, even like most of the economic beneficiaries of Ukraine as a system, as value generating society, they all super scared right now and talking about negotiations, getting into negotiations with Russia. Which is totally contrasts with Ukrainian population, which is totally opposing them. So this is again going back to this big problem in Ukraine, that there's completely incompetent and unfit leadership, not just the very top, but throughout the system in Ukraine, that simply cannot win this war unless it has highly exceeding level of resources over the other side. And at this point, the situation is sort of changing a little bit more into balance, and even a little bit more into Russian favor. So again, as I said, this is going to be a difficult choice in front of Ukrainian society. What happens next? Because, for example, just such a simple thing as production of the bullets cartridges, I think that's the right way to say it, is not being done in Ukraine. The manufacturing facility, brand new from scratch, costs somewhere around like 30-40 million US dollars. So it's totally doable. It's nothing. It's not rocket science. It's pretty primitive manufacturing. Nothing has been done about artillery shells. Ukraine still, they didn't move to start production, because Ukraine has ability to produce in, even let's say we say, okay, fine, Russia can attack most of this this part of Ukraine, but there's part of Ukraine that's separated by the mountains. This is Carpathian Mountains here, as you can see. There is a region called Zaporizhya here, and it's going to be pretty much impossible or nearly impossible for the Russian rocket strikes and to attack something that's sort of on the other slope of the mountain, essentially. It's basically protected. And not to mention that you can always build underground facility in the mines, similar to what Germany did in World War II, and they were pretty successful increasing their production despite increasing number of air raids. So again, nothing has been done. This is 7 months of the war, and those facilities, they don't take forever to actually establish. So again, this is just sort of tip of the iceberg of the problems with Ukrainian leadership. Not to mention, and I probably will share this in one of the next videos, that majority of this economic beneficiaries are all outside of Ukraine, in very nice places such as Nizza, in France, Monaco, which is Côte d'Azur, the same thing, similar to Nizza, and then Vienna. I'm not sure why Vienna attracts them as a magnet, but apparently there's something there. Readers can comment and can enlighten what's there. But basically, they have villas there. They living wonderful, beautiful life without knowing what the cost of the war, essentially. And so these people now want sort of negotiation and peace on whatever terms Russia wants. That's a force that now strongly driving for negotiations with Russia. And they have a lot of, they essentially control political system in Ukraine. So even the society could be against it. That's going to be, we'll see who sort of prevails in this situation. And that actually might be also the move from the Russian leadership as well is even this mobilization is essentially kind of like a last opportunity to force Ukraine into negotiations that will lead to concession of the most of the territories, meaning Crimea goes to Russia, then Luhansk region goes to Russia, and Donetsk region goes to Russia. Probably Ukraine will get back Kherson and Zaporizhya, and that still remains under question. So this is basically could be also very well calculated move by Russian leadership. The problem was that Ukrainian political leadership is not terribly respected in the country in the first place because ordinary people see that they're inept, corrupt, and professional. So it's not like they have sort of much of the moral authority inside of the country. So this move probably will fail, but obviously this is just a subjective opinion about the situation. There's also some just kind of like a interesting fact that tells you about the magnitude of the lies by both sides. So the Russian Minister of Defense said that Russia lost 6,000 soldiers dead. About, I would say, a little bit less than a month ago, very end of August, Ukrainian Minister of Defense said that Ukraine lost 9,000 soldiers, meaning that. Then Russian Minister of Defense claims that they killed 9,000, something like that, like 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers, some insane number. And Ukrainian side also claims that they killed, I think, 55 or probably now more Russian soldiers. So basically, you can see the magnitude of the lies. None of these numbers are anywhere in the ballpark to sort of describe reality. But it just kind of shows you the magnitude of just why the numbers that presented by the official sort of sources in both countries are just trash, just empty lies that don't have anything behind them. So now let's actually move and do a quick walk through the front line. As a heads up for those who just want to see Israeli developments, really not much is going on. Apparently on the Russian side, Russian command is expecting to get those reinforcements as soon as possible and trying to maintain the front line and not to sort of have a collapse here in North Luhansk area, North Luhansk front line. Ukrainian command is it is actually unclear why it's not trying to forcibly attack out of this Liman bridgehead. But that attack kind of like they're not trying to develop sort of the initial success that helped them to liberate this territory between the two rivers essentially. And then the other sort of unintelligent sort of saying what Ukrainian side is doing, they're doing this frontal attacks on this road highway between Mykolaiv and Kherson or sort of villages nearby. And Russian actually propaganda sources show those suicidal basically attacks that in many ways the officers that send those soldiers to do those attacks are absolutely criminal to those people because those people just most of them are not trained and don't understand what they are going to getting into basically because just to explain what happened is like there's no reconnaissance. They didn't even know where the minefields are. So essentially the Russian and they attacking in the area where the Russian artillery sort of have like I don't know how to say it in English, but basically where they already shooting before, so they basically can dial in and shoot in those points. So basically, it's like a quick response. And then again, I'm probably not explaining very well in English. But essentially, if you go into that area, the chances of surviving close to, not close to zero, but very low, let's put it this way. You're definitely going to fail. Let's not even about survival. It's just the attempt to attack through that area that's sort of controlled by Russian artillery, where they they were shooting there. They have those. They know where to shoot without adjusting their fire. That means that the response can be very quick and relatively precise. It's not precise just because of this is old Soviet weapons, but it's going to be relatively precise in that way that it's going to be sort of like it's not bombing, but it's kind of sort of carpet bombing, but with artillery shells in that small area. And it obviously, from the just probability, there's high chance of being sort of somehow negatively influenced by that fire. So again, as I said, this is absolutely improper, to say very, very diplomatically and politely, way of doing these attacks. And this is probably why so far this whole thing had stalled here. And this is why Ukraine was successful in liberating this area, because essentially hit here was where there was no Russian artillery, because Russia also doesn't have artillery everywhere, the necessary concentration of artillery to sort of successfully defend. It doesn't have everywhere. So it was all sort of concentrated on this Izum bridgehead here, and there was nothing sort of in the rear, right? And if Ukraine attacks, and even there is no skills, you simply sort of run over Russian rear units. Just psychologically you win, basically, and then you don't have the artillery response. So that's why this part was successful, and why it's so difficult and so far very I would say relatively unsuccessful, and why it stalled since the initial successes, because Russian side managed to regroup their artillery, so they concentrated on the area where this the most threatened, and that's how they then stop eventually Ukrainian attack. So the whole point of this is, if you really need to move fast. As soon as you stop, you're done, essentially. Meaning even during the initial success, because then Russian military has time to regroup and sort of bring artillery against your spear, right? And it damages your spear, and eventually slows it down. Let's put it this way: first it slows it down, and then eventually it destroys it. So this is why this is still kind of like, as I said, it's going to be death by 1,000 cuts. At the same time, Ukraine is actively attacking the pontoons and ferries. Russian side said that I think on the 21st there was close to 100 HIMARS rocket shot against the Russian ferries and pontoons here across Dnipro River. We don't have any sort of information to sort of say what was hit. There is no news on that, but pretty sure at such high concentration something got hit. But there's still supply going on. It's much sort of smaller, lower, but nevertheless it's still there. And that's why it's going to be, as I said, death by 1,000 cuts. Now, actually, let's just move to actual walks through the front line. The situation along the state border remains more or less the same. Somewhat subdued activity. Everything kind of switched back to the main front line. Now let's look what's going on here on North Luhansk section of the front line. Things here are more or less the same, with only exception, which is also not a great sign, is that now Russian forces tried to attack this eastern Kupiansk, which is Ukrainian bridgehead on eastern side of Oskil River, which the Oskil River splits this town into two pieces, and the industrial and logistical sort of center is on the eastern side. The old sort of town, the sort of original town, is on the western side, but then all industry and all of the railroad lines are on the eastern side. So, and this really means that either Russian side is starting to get some reinforcements, or they sort of recovering from the initial shock from the initial sort of losses. And also what this also means, that's what I said before, that Russian side probably brought in artillery here in this area and tries to employ its traditional tactic of basically carpet bombing with artillery shells and turning into like moon landscape and then sort of capturing this territory once the resistance subdued significantly, essentially. So this is what's going on here, and as I said, that's not a great development. Now let's move a little bit. Let's see what's going on here near Le Mans. Things here are stable, no new sort of advances or no new large-scale attacks. Sort of status quo remains. Russian forces still holding on to Le Mans so far. This is just the big picture. Again, as I said, now there was this Ukrainian bridgehead here near Kupiansk, and then now there's this Le Mans bridgehead. At this point, Russian troops don't have enough forces, even though they did try to do some small scale counterattack, but it was just probably just to kind of like stop Ukrainian forces from attacking. It wasn't sort of a real sort of true counteroffensive. And then this is where as I said, more dangerous situation where the Russian troops starting to attack, and that probably means that artillery is behind it and hard at work. Now let's move to North Donbass section of the front line. So here is interesting sort of development. As I said, Wagner mercenaries were pulled in this area to stop, to prevent loss of Berestove by Russian troops, which, based on information I have, they managed to sort of keep control of Berestove, because I said earlier that Ukrainian troops managed to sort of breach Russian defenses and approached Berestove, but eventually they were repelled. So now this Wagner mercenaries, they trying to attack here to create a threat to flank of this Ukrainian group, to basically stop attacks that are happening here in direction of oil refinery and then in direction of Berestov, essentially. But the biggest sort of prize and goal is obviously Lysychansk. This is where this sort of local sort of offensive, or it's not really offensive, but sort of local attack, that's where it's aimed at this point, with the bigger goal, obviously, of creating the sort of threat to Russian flanks and essentially moving south and collapsing the rest of the front line. So this is where they move. They attack here. They still attack in Soledar, and apparently for the reason because some of them were pulled from this Bakhmut, Soledar, and south area. There were no attacks in Bakhmut today, which is a typical place where there are attacks. But there were still attacks in this sort of southern section, which is typical areas. All of these villages, Vesela Dolina, Zaitsevo, Dradivka, Kurdyumivka. This is just never stopping attacks in this section, basically. For some reason, Russian command believes that this is the sort of place for opportunity. Now let's move south. Let's see what's going on in the central Donbass section of the front line. Things here sort of more or less the same. Some relatively weak Russian attacks out of this Pisky village that they captured in this Marinka, Novomikhailivka. So basically all traditional areas without hope for success, just to kind of keep Ukrainian units engaged in this area. Probably there is no much logic at this point for these attacks, to be honest, from the Russian side. Now let's move to Zaporizhya front line. Nothing is happening here from a big picture perspective. Just regular artillery shelling, all sort of reconnaissance action and such. Now let's move finally to Kherson bridgehead. So the front line more or less unchanged since yesterday. The only thing where this is the place where I was talking about, where Ukrainian troops tried to launch attack. That was failed. There were two villages, Pravdine and Soldatsky, that were sort of kind of like in a gray zone where it's not really controlled by Russian. forces not controlled between Ukrainian and Ukrainian side wanted to sort of gain control of those places. So they were repelled out of the that attack sort of failed, and on the heels of that attack, Russian forces essentially did sort of small scale counterattack, and they managed to sort of capture this gray zone, no man's land. So now those two villages are formally under their control. But beyond this, this is the only sort of, in many ways, this is sort of uneventful sort of situation. And just as a whole assessment, attacking straight towards Kherson is really poorly thought out idea, because it's very clear this is where the Russian side is expecting attack, where the artillery is gathered, and even, let's say, if Russian side has less artillery shells, this is probably the top priority area for artillery shells, that they definitely would sort of try not to spare shells in this area, let's put it this way. They may be more willing to sort of not spare somewhere here or even here or there, but it's definitely this is the top priority, because this is about 20 kilometers to Kherson, essentially. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow. Bye bye.